The rain was merciless that night, hammering down as though the entire sky had chosen me for punishment. My sneakers splashed through puddles, my clothes clung to me like heavy chains, and the plastic bag filled with wrinkled clothes dug into my palms. Just an hour earlier, I had been at my own birthday party. 18 candles. Friends gathered. My mom's nervous smile. But everything shattered when my stepdad, Richard Hale, stood before the entire family and spat the words that split my world apart. "You're not my son. Get lost." Then he tossed a bag of crumpled clothes at my feet. That was his gift to me. Humiliated in front of everyone I knew, abandoned by the only family I had, I walked into the storm with nothing but shame and questions. I truly believed my story was over. But then, headlights pierced through the rain. A sleek black car slowed beside me. The tinted window rolled down, and a man leaned forward, his gaze steady, almost knowing. "Are you Liam Anderson?" he asked. I froze, clutching my bag tighter. My voice trembled when I whispered, "Yes." The man gave a single nod. His voice was calm but carried weight, as if rehearsed for years. "Your true father sent me." Those words cracked open my world. I'd always known Richard wasn't my biological father. That much was obvious from the way he treated me, like a stain he couldn't remove. But I'd been told my real father abandoned us, that he walked away without a second thought. Mom never spoke of him. Richard made sure of that. The stranger's car door swung open. "Get in," he said. "Unless you'd prefer to. Drown out here." I hesitated, water streaming down my face, mingling with the tears I refused to acknowledge. The stranger was middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that seemed to read every thought crossing my mind. "My name's Julian," he said. "I've been looking for you for some time." "Looking for me? Why would anyone look for me?" He simply gestured to the passenger seat. "That's a conversation better had somewhere dry, don't you think?" I stood there, the rain pelting my shoulders, the weight of Richard's final rejection still crushing my chest. What did I have to lose? I slid into the leather seat, my soaking clothes immediately forming puddles beneath me. "I'm sorry," I muttered, glancing at the water damage I was causing. Julian seemed unconcerned. "Water dries, some wounds don't." We drove in silence for several minutes, windshield wipers fighting against the downpour, headlights catching the reflection of raindrops like falling stars. Maplewood, Oregon had never seemed so dark, so foreign to me. This was the town where I'd grown up, where I'd spent 18 years trying to disappear into the background of Richard's life. And now, in one night, I truly had. "How do you know who I am?" I finally asked. Julian kept his eyes on the road. "Your father has never stopped looking for you, Liam. 18 years and not a single day passed where he didn't think about you. That's not possible. He left us." "Is that what your mother told you?" I shifted uncomfortably. "She didn't have to. Richard made it clear enough." Julian's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Richard Hale has been lying to you your entire life." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Here, this belongs to you." I took it with trembling fingers, afraid of what might be inside. The paper felt heavy, significant somehow. "Open it when you're ready," Julian said softly. "Not because I tell you to." We pulled into a diner on the outskirts of, town, Pat's, a place I'd driven past countless times but never entered. At this hour, it was nearly empty except for a waitress wiping down counters and an elderly couple sharing pie in the corner. Julian led me to a booth far from the windows, away from prying eyes. I placed the mysterious envelope beside me, too afraid to open it yet. "Coffee?" he asked. And I nodded, though I'd never developed a taste for it. I just needed something to hold, something warm to remind me I wasn't completely lost. The waitress brought our drinks without much interest in my bedraggled appearance. Small mercies. "Your father's name is David Foster," Julian said after taking a sip. "He lives about 2 hours from here. If he's so interested in me, where has he been for 18 years? Julian's eyes held mine. "Fighting. Every legal avenue, every possible path to reach you. Richard Hale made sure they all led nowhere. Why would he do that? Power. Control." Julian's voice hardened. "And your mother let him." I flinched. Mom had always been my shield, the buffer between Richard's coldness and my desperate need for acceptance. Even tonight, when Richard had humiliated me, she'd stood frozen, eyes downcast, saying nothing as I walked out into the rain. "She tried," I said weakly, though the defense felt hollow even to me. "Did she?" Julian asked, not unkindly. Or did she choose her comfort over your truth? I stared into my coffee, watching ripples form as my hands shook. 18 years of memories cascaded through my mind. Richard's constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Mom's whispered apologies when he couldn't hear. Her promises that things would get better that never materialized. What does David want from me? I asked, the word father sticking in my throat. Just to meet you. Just to tell you his side. After that, whatever happens is up to you. I finally reached for the envelope, tearing it open with clumsy fingers. Inside was a photograph, yellowed and creased from years of handling. In it, a younger man with my eyes and jawline held a baby, looking down with an expression of such pure love it made my chest ache. Written on the back in careful handwriting, Liam, 3 months old, I will find you again. Something broke inside me then. Some wall I'd built to protect myself from the hope that someone, somewhere might actually want me. He kept looking, I whispered. Every day, Julian confirmed. He hired me 7 years ago. We've been watching, waiting for the right moment. Your 18th birthday seemed fitting. 7 years, I repeated numbly. All those times I'd felt watched on the playground, walking home from school. Had that been Julian? Had my real father been that close all along? Will you meet him? Julian asked. No pressure. If you say no, I'll drive you wherever you want to go. David made that clear. Your choice matters above all else. I looked again at the photograph, at the man who claimed to have never stopped fighting for me, then out at the rain that continued to fall as though the sky itself was grieving. Yes, I said finally. Take me to him. Julian's car cut through the rain like a black arrow, headlights illuminating the winding roads leading away from Maplewood. I watched my hometown disappear in the side mirror, shrinking with each mile until it was nothing but a cluster of lights fading into the storm. My fingers still clutched the photograph of David, my father, and the baby I barely recognized as myself. Did you know him well? I asked Julian, needing to break the silence. Before he hired you, I mean. Julian's eyes remained fixed on the road. We served together. Marines. David saved my life in Afghanistan. The kind of debt you never forget. I tried to picture this stranger, this David Foster, in military fatigues, risking his life for others. It seemed so at odds with the deadbeat father Richard had described throughout my childhood. Was he a good man? The question sounded childish even to my own ears, but I needed to know. Julian's expression softened. One of the best I've known. When he learned about you, that your mother was pregnant, he was overjoyed. Couldn't stop talking about the nursery he'd built, the books he'd read to you. Then why did he leave? He didn't. Julian's voice hardened. Your mother met Richard when you were barely 1 year old. David was deployed. By the time he came home, she had already moved in with Richard, taken you with her. She wouldn't just... Richard had money, stability. David was a soldier with PTSD and nightmares. It wasn't a fair fight. The rain intensified, a steady rhythm against the roof that matched my racing heartbeat. Outside, Oregon's dense forest flanked the highway. Black. Silhouettes against the midnight sky. I'd never been this far from home alone before. There's more to it, isn't there? I asked, sensing Julian was holding back. He sighed heavily. Richard threatened legal action. Claimed David was unstable, dangerous. Your mother supported these claims. David fought it, but the court sided with them. Richard adopted you officially when you were 4. I don't remember any of this. You were too young. And afterward, they moved to Maplewood, changed your last name. It took David years to find you again. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching water streak across the surface. My entire life had been built on lies so fundamental I couldn't begin to unravel them. Every memory felt suspect now, every moment with my mother, tainted by this new knowledge. Why tonight? I asked. Why wait until Richard threw me out? Julian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. David wanted to respect the court's decision until you were legally an adult. He didn't want to disrupt your life if you were happy. The word hung between us, hollow and absurd. He watched from a distance. Julian continued. Saw how Richard treated you. It nearly broke him, but he was afraid intervening would only make things worse. I thought about all the baseball games where no one cheered my name, all the school events where Richard stood stone-faced while other parents beamed with pride. Had David been there, hidden in the crowd, watching? The thought was both comforting and painful. We're almost there, Julian said as we exited the highway onto a narrow country road. About 15 minutes out. Panic suddenly clutched at my chest. "I'm not ready," I blurted. What do I even say to him? "Nice to meet you after 18 years? Julian's eyes met mine briefly in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to say anything, Liam. Just listen. That's all he's asking for." The road wound through thick forest before opening to reveal a valley dotted with scattered homes. Julian turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a modest cabin, lights glowing warmly through the windows despite the late hour. "He's waiting," Julian said softly. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if I'm a disappointment? What if I'm not what he expected? Julian parked the car and turned to face me fully. "Liam, listen to me. That man there has kept your baby shoes in his bedside drawer for 18 years. He celebrates your birthday every year with a small cake and a silent toast. He has followed your school records, your baseball stats, everything he could access legally. You could never disappoint him." I swallowed hard, eyes burning. "But I'm nobody. I'm nothing special. To him, you're everything." Julian's voice was gentle, but firm. "And maybe it's time you learned what that feels like." We sat in silence for several moments, rain drumming on the roof, the cabin's porch light casting a golden glow through the darkness. Finally, I reached for the door handle. "Wait," Julian stopped me. "Whatever happens in there, whatever you decide after tonight, I want you to know something. You deserve better than what Richard gave you. You always did." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. The rain had lessened to a drizzle as we approached the cabin. Each step felt momentous, like I was walking toward a precipice. Before Julian could knock, the door swung open. And there he was, David Foster, older than in the photograph, with gray threading through his dark hair, but unmistakably the same. Man, he had my eyes, my chin, even the way I stood with weight shifted slightly to one side. For one breathless moment, we just stared at each other. Then, Liam, just my name, spoken with such reverence it might have been a prayer. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Years of practiced emotional restraint, survival tactics in Richard's house, held me rigid and silent. David seemed to understand. He didn't rush forward, didn't force an embrace. Instead, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in from the rain," he said softly. "Please." I glanced at Julian, who nodded encouragement. With a deep breath that seemed to pull from the very bottom of my soul, I stepped across the threshold into my father's house. The interior was warm, filled with the scent of coffee and something sweet. Baking. Simple furniture, books everywhere, and, my breath caught, photographs of me. School pictures I recognized, baseball team photos, even what looked like surveillance shots of me walking to school or sitting in the park. "I know it seems strange," David said, following my gaze. "Maybe even creepy. But they were all I had." I moved closer to one frame, me at 14, gangly and serious, standing with my middle school science fair project. I remembered that day clearly. I'd won second place, but Richard had only commented that first would have been better. "You won for measuring water pollution in local streams," David said quietly. "Julian told me you were brilliant." I was so proud. The simple admission, so different from anything I'd ever heard from Richard, made my legs unsteady. I sank onto the nearest chair, overwhelmed. David kept a respectful distance, perching on the edge of the couch. Up close, I could see the lines around his eyes, the weight of years etched into his face. "I don't know what Julian told you," he began, "but I want you to hear everything from me. Ask anything. I'll tell you the truth, even when it's ugly." I looked up at him, at this stranger who was somehow also a part of me. Outside, the rain continued its gentle patter against the roof, creating a cocoon around this moment that felt separate from the rest of my life. "Start at the beginning," I said finally. "Tell me how you lost me." "Your mother and I met during my leave," David began, his voice steady but tinged with memory. "She worked at a coffee shop near the base. I was 23. She was 21. It was one of those whirlwind romances. Intense, all-consuming." He rose and moved to the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of coffee. The routine felt strangely domestic, as though we'd done this 100 times before. "When I got deployment orders, we had only been together for 4 months. But we knew." He paused, correcting himself. "I thought we knew it was real. She told me she was pregnant the night before I shipped out." I took the mug, letting its warmth seep into my palms. "Were you upset?" David's eyes widened. "Upset? God, no. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. I proposed that night. She said yes." The image was difficult to reconcile. My mother, young and in love with this man, agreeing to build a life with him. The same mother who had spent years appeasing Richard, walking on eggshells, urging me to do the same. I was deployed for 11 months, David continued. Every letter I wrote, every call I made was about you. I had a fellow Marine teach me how to knit so I could make you a baby blanket. He laughed softly at the memory. It was hideous, but I was so proud of it. What color? I asked, oddly fixated on this detail. Blue. Not because you were a boy. We didn't know yet. Blue because your mother loved the ocean. I nodded, filing away this fragment of a woman I'd never truly known. My mother rarely went near water now. Richard thought beaches were overrated wastes of time. When I came home, David continued, everything had changed. Your mother was distant, nervous. You were almost a year old Then, I'd missed your birth, your first smile, your first Christmas. He took a long sip of coffee before continuing, and I noticed a slight tremor in his hands. At first, I thought it was just the adjustment period. Then she mentioned a man she'd met, Richard, a business owner, stable, with a nice house. She said he'd been helping her with you while I was gone. The familiar bitterness in his voice mirrored what I'd heard in Richard's whenever he spoke about my real father. Two men despising each other across years and miles, with me caught in between. 2 weeks after I came home, she left with you. Just packed some bags while I was at a VA appointment. The note she left said you deserved better than a broken soldier. I flinched at the cruelty. Did you have PTSD? David nodded. Slowly. Nightmares, jumpiness, nothing violent, nothing dangerous, just haunted. I was getting treatment, but it wasn't fast enough for her. Or for Richard, I added quietly. Richard saw an opportunity. A vulnerable young mother, a child he could claim, and a veteran he could paint as unstable. David's jaw tightened. I fought it in court, but Richard had resources I couldn't match. Character witnesses, expensive lawyers. Your mother testified that my condition made me unpredictable around you. My stomach twisted. All my life, Richard had portrayed my biological father as a deserter, a man who'd abandoned his responsibilities. The truth, that he'd been systematically pushed out, his rights stripped away, was almost too painful to absorb. The court granted them full custody. When you were 3, David said. Then they moved, changed your last name after the adoption, and disappeared. But you found me, I said. David's eyes softened. It took years. By then, the court order specified no contact until you turned 18. I hired Julian when you were 11. He helped me track you, made sure you were surviving. The word choice wasn't lost on me. Not thriving, not happy, surviving. I watched from a distance, David continued. Baseball games, school events, always careful to stay hidden. Richard had made it clear that if I approached you, he'd file harassment charges, keep you even further from me. I thought of all those moments I'd felt so alone, so unwanted. Had he been there, silently witnessing, equally helpless? Why didn't you just kidnap me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. David's smile was sad. I considered it, more than once. Julian talked me down. Said if I did that, I'd never be able to be your father legally. We'd spend our lives looking over our shoulders. The logic was sound, but some childish part of me wished he'd done it anyway. Rescued me from Richard's coldness years ago. Tonight, I said, Julian mentioned you'd been waiting for the right moment. Why now specifically? David hesitated, exchanging a glance with Julian, who had remained a silent presence by the door. We've been watching more closely as your 18th birthday approached. Julian saw what happened at your party. Shame burned through me at the memory. Richard's public rejection, the bag of clothes, my friend's horrified stares. So, you knew I had nowhere else to go. No, David said firmly. I knew you were finally free to make your own choice. And I hoped, his voice caught, I hoped you might choose me, if only to hear my side. The raw vulnerability in his admission cracked something open inside me. Here was a man who had lost everything. His fiancé, his child, years of fatherhood, yet still spoke with hope rather than bitterness. I have something for you, David said, rising abruptly. He disappeared down a hallway, returning with a small wooden box. I've been adding to this since the day you were born. He placed it in my hands. It was heavier than it looked, worn smooth with age and handling. I lifted the lid cautiously. Inside was a collection of treasures. The blue baby blanket he'd mentioned, clumsily, knitted but clearly made with love. A tiny hospital bracelet with my birth information. Letters dated over years, all addressed to me but never sent. Small presents wrapped in colorful paper. 18 of them, I realized with a start. Birthday gifts for each year he'd missed. You can open them if you want, he said quietly. Or not. They're yours either way. I lifted one package, small and wrapped, in silver paper, turning it over in my hands. The tag read, "For Liam, on your 10th birthday." With trembling fingers, I unwrapped it. Inside was a pocket knife, engraved with my initials. "I got one from my father when I turned 10, David explained. "I know it's probably meaningless now." "It's not," I interrupted, my voice rough with emotion. "Richard never gave me anything like this." David's expression darkened. "He gave you his name. Nothing else mattered to him." The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. Richard hadn't wanted a son. He'd wanted possession, control, another piece of evidence that he'd won something David had lost. "All these years," I said slowly. "Did you ever try to contact my mother again? To change her mind?" David's eyes met mine. "Once? When?" "You were about 7. I'd heard through an old mutual friend that Richard wasn't kind to you. I called her, begged her to reconsider the custody arrangement." "What did she say?" "That she'd made her choice. That disrupting your life again would only cause more damage." He looked down at his hands. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was selfish to keep trying. "No," I said with unexpected fierceness. "You weren't selfish. You were being a father." The word hung between us, charged with meaning neither of us was ready to fully claim. But it was there, the possibility of it, the shape of what might grow between us. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a preternatural silence broken only by occasional drips from the eaves. Dawn wasn't far off. We'd talked through most of the night. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly acutely aware that I had nowhere to go. No home, no plan beyond this moment. "That's entirely up to you," David said. "You can stay here. I have a room ready for you. Has been for years." The admission should have seemed strange, but somehow didn't. "Or if that's too much, too soon, Julian can help you find another arrangement." Julian nodded confirmation. From his corner. "But whatever you decide," David continued, "I want you to know you're not alone anymore. You have options. You have..." He hesitated. "You have family, if you want it." Family. The word landed like a revelation. Not the cold facsimile I'd endured under Richard's roof, but something genuine. Something I could choose rather than something forced upon me. I looked around the cabin, at the photographs documenting a childhood witnessed from afar, at the box of 18 years' worth of love stored up with nowhere to go, at this man with my eyes and my jawline who had never stopped fighting for me. "I'd like to stay," I said finally. "At least for now, if that's okay." David's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Gradual, then brilliant. "More than okay," he said. "It's what I've hoped for every day for 18 years. I woke disoriented, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic gripped me. Where was I? Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. Richard's rejection, the rain, Julian's car, David's story. I was in my father's house, my real father. The room David had prepared for me was simple but thoughtful. A comfortable bed, a desk by the window overlooking the valley, shelves lined with books he thought I might enjoy. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph of my mother holding infant me, David's arm around both of us. A moment of happiness that hadn't lasted. I dressed quickly in the same clothes from yesterday, now stiff with dried rain. When I emerged, I found David in the kitchen, making, breakfast. The domesticity of the scene struck me. So different from mornings at Richard's house, where tension always hung thick in the air. "Morning," David said, glancing up with a smile that still held traces of disbelief, as though he couldn't quite trust that I was really there. "Hope you like eggs. It's about all I can cook without burning the place down." "Eggs are great," I said awkwardly, hovering at the edge of the kitchen. "Julian had to head out," David continued, sliding a plate toward me. "But he left your bag from last night." The reminder of Richard's gift, the plastic bag of hastily gathered clothes, sent a fresh wave of humiliation through me. "We can get you whatever you need," David added quickly, reading my expression. "Clothes, school supplies, anything." I sat, he at the table, picking at my eggs. School's almost done anyway. 3 more weeks. Then a thought struck me. I don't even know if I can go back. Richard made such a scene. David sat opposite me, his own breakfast untouched. You have every right to finish at your school, Liam. If you want to go back, we'll make it happen. It's too far from here, I pointed out. Almost 2 hours. Then I'll drive you. Every day if necessary. The simple offer, made without hesitation, without weighing inconvenience, left me speechless. In Richard's world, everything came with conditions, with calculations of effort versus reward. Look, David said gently, I know this is all overwhelming. You've had your world turned upside down in less than 24 hours. We can take this as slow as you need. I nodded, grateful for the space to breathe, to process. I should probably call my mom, I said finally. She's probably worried. Something flashed across David's face. Pain, maybe anger, before he carefully schooled his expression. Of course. The phone's yours to use. I stepped onto the porch with David's cell phone, my heart pounding. What would I even say? The number rang 4 times before she answered. Hello? Her voice was thin, wary. Mom? It's me. Liam! Relief flooded her tone. Where are you? I've been worried sick. The concern seemed genuine, but it ignited an unexpected anger in me. Really? Because you didn't seem too concerned when Richard threw me out last night. Silence stretched between us. Then, I didn't know he was going to do that. I swear, Liam. But you didn't stop him either. The accusation hung in the air, irrevocable. It's complicated. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. He was so angry, I couldn't— I'm with David, I interrupted. My real father. The sharp intake of breath told me everything. Fear, recognition, guilt. How did you— Does it matter? He told me everything, Mom. How Richard pushed him out. How you let it happen. That's not fair, she protested weakly. You don't understand what it was like. Then explain it to me. Why did you lie all these years? Why did you let me believe he abandoned us? Her silence was damning. Richard provided security, she finally said. David was unstable. The nightmares, the flashbacks. I was young and scared, with a baby to protect. And later, when I was older, when Richard treated me like I was nothing, I tried to shield you. No, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. You chose Richard. Over and over. You chose him. I could hear her crying now, soft broken sounds that would have weakened my resolve in the past. But something had hardened in me overnight, a protective shell around a newly discovered truth. I'm staying with David for a while. I said more calmly. I need time to think. Please, Liam. I'll call again soon. I ended the call before she could say more, before her tears could sway me. When I returned inside, David was cleaning up breakfast, his back to me. But the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed his tension. She was worried, I offered, setting his phone down. David turned, his expression carefully neutral. She's, your mother. Whatever happened between us, I'd never try to come between you. The statement, gracious, unselfish, only highlighted how different he was from Richard, who had spent 18 years actively trying to sever any connection I might feel to my biological father. What if I want to stay here? I asked abruptly. Not just for now. Permanently. David's eyes widened. You'd be welcome. More than welcome. But, Liam, this is a big decision. You barely know me. I know enough, I said. More than I knew yesterday. He shook his head, not in refusal, but in caution. Give yourself time. There's no rush. The day passed in a strange, gentle rhythm. David showed me around the property, the workshop where he built custom furniture, the garden he'd started last spring, the creek that ran along the eastern boundary. We talked about small things, safe things, books we'd both read, baseball teams we supported, movies we'd seen. By unspoken agreement, we avoided the heavier topics. Richard, my mother, the years of separation. There would be time for those conversations. For now, we were just learning the shape of each other's presence. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, my phone buzzed with a text. I'd been receiving messages all day from friends who'd witnessed Richard's outburst, but I'd ignored them, not ready to explain. This one, however, made my blood run cold. Richard's telling everyone you ran away. Says you stole money from them before you left. Mom won't contradict him. People are believing it, Liam. Tyler, Shao, had been my best friend since 6th grade. If anyone would stand by me, it would be him. Bad news? David asked, noting my expression. I showed him the message. His face darkened as he read it. That son of a bitch, he muttered, then immediately looked chagrined. Sorry, I shouldn't. No, you're right, I said. He is. We sat in silence for a moment, the peaceful evening suddenly tainted. He can't let me go, can he? I said finally. Even after throwing me away, he has to destroy whatever's left. David's voice was careful, measured. Richard Hale is a man who needs to control the narrative. He's rewriting history to make himself the victim. What do I do? That depends, David said. What do you want? The question was so simple, yet no one had ever asked me before. What did I want? Not what would keep the peace. Not what would please Richard or comfort my mother. What did I want? I want the truth to come out, I said slowly. I want people to know what really happened. David nodded. Then we'll make sure it does. On your terms, in your time. The gentle support, the lack of direction or demand, was so foreign I almost didn't recognize it as parenting. But perhaps this was what it should have been all along. As night fell, we moved inside. David showed me how to build a fire in the small stone fireplace, his hands patient as he guided mine through the process. Something about the simple act, learning from him, creating warmth together, felt profoundly healing. We'll figure this out, David said, as the flames caught and grew stronger. Whatever comes next. You're not alone in this anymore. I believed him. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to hope. After 3 days at David's cabin, 3 days of cautious conversations, shared meals, and gradual comfort, I made a decision. I needed to go back to Maplewood, at least to finish school. I couldn't let Richard's actions rob me of my graduation, my friendships, my sense of completion. I'll drive you, David offered immediately when I told him over breakfast. We can leave whenever you're ready. You don't have to, I protested. It's a long drive and you have work. Liam, David's voice was gentle but firm. Nothing is more important to me than helping you through this. The simple declaration still caught me off guard. After 18 years of being an afterthought in Richard's household, the idea that I could be someone's priority seemed almost incomprehensible. We left mid-morning, the June sunshine warming the valley as David's truck wound down the gravel drive. I'd packed the few clothes from Richard's parting gift, along with 2 shirts David had insisted I take from his closet. They were too big, but I didn't mind. The first hour of the drive passed in comfortable silence. David didn't pressure me to talk, didn't flood me with questions about my plans or feelings. He simply let me exist beside him, watching the Oregon landscape scroll past my window. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Anything. When you fought for custody, did you ever consider just giving up? Moving on? David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No, he said after a moment. Not once. Why not? It would have been easier. He glanced at me, eyes troubled. Because you're my son. Because I made a promise the day you were born that I would protect you, love you, be there for you. His voice roughened. I failed at those things, but not for lack of trying. You didn't fail, I said quietly. You're here now. The remainder of the, drive was filled with lighter conversation. David telling me stories about his woodworking projects, me sharing anecdotes about school that didn't involve Richard. By the time we reached the outskirts of Maplewood, I almost felt prepared for what lay ahead. Almost. Where to? David asked as we entered the familiar streets of my hometown. I directed him to Tyler's house. I'd texted my friend that morning, asking if I could stay with his family for the remaining few weeks of school. His parents had agreed immediately. As we pulled into Tyler's driveway, anxiety twisted in my gut. This would be the first time anyone from Maplewood would see David, would see us together. The undeniable resemblance between us would make the truth obvious. Tyler emerged from his front door before we'd even parked, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw me. He jogged to the truck as I climbed out. Man, I was worried about you, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. His eyes darted to David, curious but not suspicious. Tyler, this is David, I said, the introduction feeling inadequate. My father. My biological father. Tyler's eyebrows shot up, but to his credit, he didn't miss a beat. He extended his hand. Nice to meet you, sir. David shook Tyler's hand, his expression grateful for the simple acceptance. Likewise. Thank you for being there for Liam. Tyler's parents appeared on the porch, their faces showing the same surprise but also the same immediate acceptance. Within minutes, they had ushered us inside, insisted David stay for lunch, and generally treated the situation as though long-lost fathers appeared every day in Maplewood. It was only when Tyler and I were alone, carrying my meager belongings to the guest room, that he spoke what was clearly on his mind. "Dude," he whispered. "This explains so much about why Richard was such an asshole to you." I nodded, setting my bag on the bed. "Yeah, turns out everything he told me about my real dad was a lie." "People are talking," Tyler warned. "Richard's version is not great." "What's he saying exactly?" Tyler grimaced. "That you had a meltdown at your party, stole money from their safe, and ran off with some suspicious character who'd been hanging around the school." The absurdity of the accusation would have been laughable if it wasn't so calculated. Richard was ensuring that if I returned, I'd be met with suspicion and judgment rather than sympathy. "What about my mom?" I asked. "Is she backing him up?" "She's not contradicting him," Tyler said carefully. "But she seems, I don't know, broken somehow. My mom ran into her at the grocery store yesterday. Said she looked like she hadn't slept in days." A complicated knot of emotions tangled in my chest. Anger at her complicity, worry for her, well-being, grief for the mother I thought I knew. "Are you coming back to school tomorrow?" Tyler asked, changing the subject. "Yeah, I need to finish. Only 18 days left. People will stare," he warned. "Ask questions." I shrugged, a newfound confidence straightening my spine. "Let them. I'm done hiding the truth to protect Richard's ego." When we returned downstairs, we found David engaged in easy conversation with Tyler's parents. Mr. Reynolds was a contractor, and they were discussing different approaches to cabinet joinery with the enthusiasm of fellow craftsmen. Seeing David there, relaxed, respected, treated as an equal, cemented something in me. This was my father. Not the broken, dangerous man Richard had described, but someone solid and real and worthy of knowing. As David prepared to leave, he pulled me aside on the front porch. "I'll be staying in town," he said. "Got a room at the Pine Motel. I'm not going anywhere until you're done with school." "You don't have to do that," I protested. "It's almost 3 weeks." "I know I don't have to." His eyes held mine. "I want to, if that's okay with you." The consideration that my wishes mattered in his decision still felt novel. "It's okay," I said. "More than okay." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I won't interfere with your routine. Won't show up at school or anything that might make things harder. But I'll be here if you need me, just a phone call away." As I watched his truck disappear down the street, I felt simultaneously lighter and more grounded than I had in years. Whatever came. Next, Richard's lies, my mother's silence, the gossip and stares. I wasn't facing it alone anymore. The next morning, I walked into Maplewood High with Tyler flanking me like a bodyguard. The hallway conversations stuttered and stopped as we passed, curious eyes tracking our progress to our lockers. I kept my head high, refused to slink or hide. "Liam?" A tentative voice belonged to Alyssa Chen, my lab partner in AP Biology. "Are you okay? We heard things." "I'm fine," I said, surprised by how true it felt. "Just finishing out the year." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Nobody believes what Mr. Hale is saying, not those of us who were at your party. We saw what happened." The support, unexpected and freely given, caught me off guard. "Thanks," I managed. Throughout the day, more classmates approached with similar sentiments. Not everyone, of course. Some avoided me entirely, either believing Richard's version or simply uncomfortable with the drama. But enough offered quiet solidarity that the knot in my chest began to loosen. Until 5th period. I was walking to history when I spotted her. My mother, standing by the main office, her face pale and drawn. Our eyes met across the hallway. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she took a hesitant step toward me, one hand slightly outstretched. "Liam." Every emotion I'd been carefully managing surged up at once. Anger, hurt, confusion, longing. I froze, unable to advance or retreat. Tyler beside me murmured, "You don't have to talk to her now. We can go around." But I shook my head. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I left in the rain. Better here than at Richard's house. I approached her slowly, aware of curious onlookers, but beyond caring about their presence. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She glanced around nervously. "I needed to see you. To explain. Richard doesn't know I'm here." The admission that she was essentially sneaking around behind her husband's back to see her own son should have been shocking. Instead, it was merely a sad confirmation of what our family dynamic had always been. "There's nothing to explain," I said. "David told me everything." Her face tightened at the name. "He's only told you his version, which is more than you ever did." The words came out sharper than intended, edged with years of unspoken hurt. She flinched as if struck. "Please, can we talk somewhere private, just for a few minutes?" I glanced at Tyler, who nodded and stepped away, giving us space while remaining protectively nearby. 5 minutes, I said. We moved to an empty bench in the hallway, maintaining a careful distance from each other. Up close, I could see the toll the past few days had taken. Dark circles under her eyes, certain fragility in her movements. "Richard told everyone I stole from you," I said before she could speak, "that I had some kind of breakdown." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. "I know. I couldn't stop him. Couldn't or wouldn't." The question hung between us, heavy with implication. "You don't understand what he's like when he's angry," she whispered. "What he's capable of." "I understand exactly what he's like," I countered. "I've lived with it my entire life. The difference is I finally walked away." Her eyes filled with tears. "It's not that simple for me." "Why not? Why has it never been that simple?" "Because I was afraid." The words burst from her, too loud for our semi-private setting. She lowered her voice immediately. "I was afraid of losing you." "So, you let Richard control everything? Let him treat me like garbage? Let him lie about David for years?" "I thought I was protecting you," she said weakly. "From what? From a father who actually wanted me?" She had no answer for that, only silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm staying with Tyler until graduation," I said finally. "Then I'm going to live with David." She nodded, resignation in, every line of her body. "I know. I needed to see you, to make sure you were okay." "I am okay," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. For the first time in a long time. The warning bell rang, signaling 1 minute until class. I stood, gathering my backpack. "Liam," she said, a new urgency in her voice. "Be careful. He's not taking this well. He sees David's return as a threat." The warning sent a chill down my spine. Not for myself, but for David. "What do you mean?" "Just be careful," she repeated. "Both of you." As I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched, steps hurried, I felt a complex mixture of pity and anger. She had been both victim and enabler in Richard's world, and I wasn't sure which role had caused more damage. What I did know was that I needed to warn David. Richard Hale didn't lose gracefully, and he had just lost his most prized possession, control over me. I texted David immediately after school. "Need to talk. Important." He responded within minutes, suggesting we meet at a coffee shop downtown rather than at the Reynolds house or his motel. The cafe, Copper Bean, a local spot with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, was quiet in the late afternoon lull between the lunch and dinner crowds. David was already waiting at a corner table when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. "Got you one," he said, pushing a mug toward me. "Tyler mentioned you like it with lots of cream." The small detail that he'd asked about my preferences, wanted to get it right, caught me off guard. Richard had never bothered to learn such things about me. "Thanks," I said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "How was your day?" David shrugged. "Quiet. Did some work remotely. Explored Maplewood a bit." He studied my face. "Your message seemed urgent. What's going on?" I told him about the encounter with my mother, her cryptic warning about Richard seeing him as a threat. David listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned as I spoke. "She seemed really scared," I concluded. "And my mom doesn't scare easily, not anymore. She's had years of practice hiding her feelings around Richard." David nodded slowly, turning his coffee mug between his palms. "I'm not surprised," he said finally. "Men like Richard, they don't like losing what they consider theirs." "Do you think he'd actually do something? Try to hurt you?" David considered the question carefully. "Physically? Probably not. That would be too obvious, too traceable. But Richard has resources, connections. He could make things difficult in other ways. Like spreading lies about you the way he did about me? Most likely. Or using his influence with local businesses. Maybe even legal maneuvers." David's mouth tightened. "I've dealt with his tactics before, Liam. I won't let him intimidate me now." The determination in his voice was reassuring, but worry still gnawed at me. Maybe we should just leave. Go back to your place after school tomorrow. Forget this town. David shook his head firmly. Running would only validate whatever story Richard is spinning. You deserve to finish school here, with your friends, and I deserve to be here supporting you. But if he… Liam. David leaned forward, his expression serious. I spent 18 years regretting that I didn't fight harder for you. I'm not making that mistake again. Before I could respond, the bell above the cafe door jingled. I glanced up reflexively and felt my blood freeze. Richard Hale stood in the entrance, his cold gaze sweeping the room until it landed on our table. David tensed, straightening in his chair. Neither man spoke as Richard approached, his expensive shoes clicking against the wooden floor. Well, Richard said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure nearby customers could hear. Isn't this touching? The deadbeat dad returns. David remained calm, his voice low and controlled. Richard, still manipulating situations to your advantage, I see. Richard ignored him, focusing on me instead. Your mother is worried sick. Apparently sneaking around behind my back to see you at school wasn't enough. She's worried because of you, I said, finding my voice. Because of what you might do. A flash of anger crossed Richard's face before his usual mask of control slipped back into place. Always the victim, aren't you, Liam? Even after stealing from us. We both know that's a lie, I said, surprised by my own steadiness. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Do we? Because several items of value went missing the night you ran away. Quite a coincidence. David's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting me handle the confrontation. Another stark difference from Richard, who had always spoken over me, around me, for me. If something's missing from your house, I said, maybe you should look closer to home. Richard's expression darkened. Careful, boy. Accusations like that could be considered defamation. Likewise, David cut in, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath. False claims about theft could be similarly problematic, especially when made publicly. Richard's attention shifted to David, his contempt palpable. Still hiding behind legal threats, Foster? Some things never change. And some people never learn, David replied evenly. Liam is 18 now. Your control over him is over. Is it? Richard's smile turned predatory. Interesting theory, especially since he's still a dependent on my taxes, still covered by my health insurance, still driving a car registered in my name. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. I hadn't considered these practical entanglements, these invisible threads still binding me to Richard's household. All things that can be changed, David said unperturbed. Should Liam choose to do so? At what cost? Richard countered. Your military pension barely covers your own expenses, Foster. How will you pay for his, college? His medical needs? Or were you planning to play father only for the easy parts? The calculated cruelty of the attack made me flinch. But David merely took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Richard's. My financial situation is none of your concern, he said calmly. And unlike you, I don't measure parental love in dollars and cents. Richard scoffed, then turned back to me. When you're done with this little rebellion, Liam, you know where home is. Your mother will welcome you back. His voice hardened. I, however, won't be quite as forgiving next time. With that, he turned and strode out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Only when the door closed behind him did David's shoulders relax slightly. I'm sorry, I said immediately. I should have known he'd track us down. Not your fault, David assured me. Maplewood is a small town. It was inevitable we'd cross paths eventually. He's right about one thing, though, I admitted. The car I've been using is in his name. Same with my phone, my health insurance. The practical realities of untangling myself from Richard's household suddenly seemed overwhelming. All solvable problems, David said, gently, one step at a time. But college has options beyond Richard's wallet. David's expression was determined. There are scholarships, financial aid, work-study programs, and yes, I have some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to help. The offer, made without hesitation or expectation, contrasted sharply with Richard's approach to financial support, which always came with strings attached, with reminders of my indebtedness to him. I don't want to be a burden, I said quietly. David's eyes softened. Liam, listen to me. You have never been, could never be, a burden to me. Being your father is a privilege I've been denied for 18 years. Let me be that now, in whatever ways you need. The simple sincerity in his voice broke through defenses I hadn't realized I still maintained. For the first time since that rainy night, I felt tears stinging my eyes. David seemed to understand. He didn't press for a response, didn't attempt physical comfort I wasn't ready for. Instead, he signaled the waitress for refills, giving me time to compose myself. "What do we do now?" I asked finally. "About Richard?" David considered the question carefully. "We proceed as planned. You finish school. I stay in town to support you. We don't hide, but we don't engage with his provocations either. And if he escalates, then we deal with that if and when it happens." David's expression was resolute. "But I promise you this, Liam. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together." The word resonated with a promise I'd never truly experienced before. The promise of not being alone in my struggles, of having someone firmly in my corner. As we left the cafe, stepping into the late afternoon sunshine, I realized something had fundamentally shifted during that confrontation with Richard. For the first time, I had stood my ground without fear, spoken my truth without shame. And for the first time, I had a father who stood beside me rather than over me. The next 2 days passed in relative calm. I attended classes, studied for finals, spent evenings with the Reynolds family who treated me with unquestioning warmth. David kept a respectful distance, texting occasionally to check in, but never hovering. On Thursday afternoon, however, everything changed. I was leaving chemistry when Principal Matthews called me into his office. His expression was grave as he gestured me to a seat. "Liam, I've received some concerning information from your stepfather," he began, clearly uncomfortable. "He's suggesting you may have taken items from their home without permission." The accusation, now formalized through the school, sent a surge of anger through me. "That's not true, Mr. Matthews. Richard threw me out. I took only my own clothes." Matthews nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I suspected as much. Several students have corroborated that you were asked to leave during your birthday celebration." Relief washed through me. "Then why—" "Unfortunately, Mr. Hale is insistent. He's filed a police report." The words landed like a physical blow. "A police report? For what?" "Allegedly, a family heirloom watch is missing, along with some cash." The fabrication was so blatant, so calculated, it momentarily left me speechless. Richard didn't own any heirloom watches. This was pure invention, designed to discredit me, to force me back under his control or punish me for escaping it. "That's a lie," I said finally. "A complete lie." Matthews sighed heavily. "I believe you, Liam. But Officer Reynolds will want to speak with you directly. He's waiting in the conference room. Tyler's father, Officer James Reynolds." The coincidence was either incredibly fortunate or deliberately orchestrated by Matthews, who had known the Reynolds family for years. As I followed the principal to the conference room, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Richard had declared war, and he wasn't fighting fair. Officer Reynolds greeted me with a reassuring nod as I entered the conference room. Unlike the stern-faced police presence I'd expected, he sat casually at the table with only a notepad in front of him. No recording devices, no formal paperwork. "Liam," he said, his voice professional but kind. "Have a seat. This isn't an interrogation, just a conversation." Principal Matthews excused himself, closing the door behind him. I sat across from Officer Reynolds, my hands clasped tightly on the table to hide their trembling. "Tyler told us about Richard's accusations," Officer Reynolds said, cutting straight to the point. "About the alleged theft." "There was no theft," I stated firmly. "Richard made it all up." Officer Reynolds nodded, making a brief note. "I suspected as much. But I need to ask, do you have any idea why he would specifically claim a watch was taken? Why not just money or something generic?" The question caught me off guard. I thought for a moment, then understanding dawned. Because it's harder to prove a negative. I can empty my pockets, search my backpack, even let you look through the Reynolds house and you won't find any stolen cash. But with a watch, he can just say I sold it or hid it somewhere. "Smart kid," Officer Reynolds said with a hint of approval. "That's exactly right. So what happens now? Am I in trouble?" He shook his head. "Between us? This is clearly harassment. But officially, I have to investigate the claim." He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Which means I need to talk to all parties involved, including your biological father." My stomach tightened. David had nothing to do with this. I know that. But his testimony about the night you left, what you had with you, it helps build the factual record. He paused. "And frankly, I'd like to meet the man, Tyler speaks highly of him. Relief washed through me. Officer Reynolds wasn't treating this as a legitimate investigation, but as the formality it was, a necessary response to Richard's manipulation. There's something else you should know, I said, deciding to trust him completely. My mother came to see me a few days ago. She warned that Richard sees David as a threat. She seemed scared. Officer Reynolds' expression turned serious. Scared how? Like she knew Richard might do something. Something beyond just spreading lies. He made another note, his movements deliberate. Has Richard ever been violent? With you or your mother? The question made me pause. Richard's control had always been psychological, emotional, but physical. Not exactly, I said carefully. He's thrown things, punched walls, but he's never hit us. That's still intimidation, Officer Reynolds said quietly. Still abuse. The word hung between us, stark and undeniable. Abuse. I'd never labeled Richard's behavior that way, had never allowed myself to acknowledge the full reality of what our household had been. I can help, Officer Reynolds continued. Not just with this false report, but with protection if you need it. For you, for David, for your mother if she chooses to leave. The offer, so straightforward, so genuine, made my throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, I managed. Officer Reynolds stood, signaling our conversation was ending. I'll speak with David this afternoon. And Liam? His expression softened. Stay strong. Men like Richard count on silence and fear. The truth is their greatest enemy. As I left the conference room, a new resolve strengthened my spine. Richard had escalated the battle, but in doing so, he'd only succeeded in bringing more witnesses to his true nature. I texted David immediately, warning him about Officer Reynolds' impending visit. His response was immediate and calm. Thanks for the heads up. Nothing to hide here. See you after school? The rest of the day passed in a blur of final exams and whispered conversations. Word had spread about Richard's police report, but rather than generating suspicion, it seemed to have backfired, creating sympathy. For me, instead. After my last class, I found David waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. The sight of him there, openly claiming his place in my life, sent a surge of emotion through me that was difficult to name. Pride, relief, belonging. Thought you might want a ride, he said as I approached. Tyler said he has basketball practice. Thanks, I said, climbing into the passenger's seat. Did Officer Reynolds come by? David nodded, putting the truck in gear. He did. Good man. Asked thorough questions, listened carefully. He glanced at me. He also mentioned your mother's warning. I had to tell him, I said. I was worried about you. Something shifted in David's expression. A softness, a vulnerability quickly controlled. I appreciate that. But I can handle Richard. Hale. What do you think he'll do next? I asked as we pulled away from the school. David considered this, navigating through Maplewood's quiet streets. Escalate, most likely. The police report didn't have the effect he wanted. He'll try something else. Like what? Hard to say, but Richard's type is predictable in one way. They can't stand public exposure. Their power comes from controlling the narrative. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Dude, check Maplewood Community Facebook page. Richard posted something about you and your dad. It's bad. My hands shook as I pulled up the page. There it was. A lengthy post from Richard, carefully worded to seem concerned rather than vindictive. He described David as a troubled veteran with a history of instability, who had reappeared after abandoning his responsibilities, and was now manipulating a vulnerable teenager. He even hinted at potential danger, urging community members to remain vigilant. I read it aloud to David, anger building with each word. When I finished, I expected to see matching fury in his expression. Instead, I found something that looked almost like relief. This is good, David said, surprising me completely. Good? How is this good? He's painting you as some kind of unstable threat. David pulled into a park overlooking Maplewood's small lake, putting the truck in park before turning to me. It's good because he's overplayed his hand. Look at the comments. I scrolled down, expecting to find support for Richard. He was, after all, a respected businessman in Maplewood. Instead, I found dozens of comments questioning his narrative, defending me, even directly challenging his claims about David. I saw what happened at Liam's birthday party. Richard Hale is the one who should be ashamed. My son has been friends with Liam for years. He's a good kid who deserves better than this public smearing. Isn't this the same Richard Hale who threatened to pull Chamber of Commerce funding when the community center wanted to hire a competitor for the renovation? Just asking? And most surprisingly, from my English teacher, Mrs. Winters. I've had the pleasure of teaching Liam Anderson for 3 years. His character is beyond reproach. And I also had the honor of meeting his father, David Foster, when he attended Liam's sophomore poetry reading, an event I might add that his stepfather never once attended. That last comment stopped me cold. You were at my poetry reading? I asked, looking up at David. He nodded, a hint of embarrassment coloring his features. Julian helped me slip in the back. I wore a baseball cap, sat in the corner. You were brilliant, by the way. Your piece about the lighthouse keeper who never saw the sea but kept the light burning. Anyway, I still think about it. The realization that David had been there, had heard my words, had remembered them, sent a wave of emotion through me so powerful, I had to look away. Richard doesn't understand what he's done, David continued gently. By making this public, he's given people permission to speak the truth they've seen but never acknowledged. He's creating the very exposure he fears. Most. As we sat there overlooking the lake, my phone kept buzzing with notifications. Friends texting support, more comments on Richard's post contradicting his narrative, even direct messages from community members offering help. What do we do now? I asked finally. Nothing, David said. We don't need to fight this battle. The community is fighting it for us. He was right. By the time we left the park an hour later, Richard had deleted the post. But screenshots were already circulating, along with new posts from Maplewood residents sharing their own stories of Richard's bullying, manipulation, and business intimidation over the years. The dam had broken, and years of silent resentment were flooding through. That evening at the Reynolds house, we received 2 unexpected visitors. The first was Officer Reynolds, arriving not in his police capacity but as Tyler's father. Thought you should know, he said, accepting the coffee Mrs. Reynolds offered. The investigation into the alleged theft has been closed. Insufficient evidence. His slight smile conveyed what he couldn't say officially, that there had never been any real investigation, just the formalities necessary to document Richard's false claims. The second visitor arrived just as we were finishing dinner. The doorbell rang, and Mrs. Reynolds returned from answering it with my mother following hesitantly behind. She looked smaller somehow, her usual careful appearance replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back without the perfect styling Richard preferred. Her eyes found mine immediately, filled with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Please? Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds tactfully excused themselves, while David stood awkwardly, clearly unsure if he should stay or go. You can stay, I told him. Both of you should hear this. My mother's gaze shifted to David, and something complicated passed between them. A silent acknowledgement of their shared history, of the love they had both, in their different ways, felt for me. She sat carefully on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I left him, she said simply. This afternoon. I packed what I could fit in my car and checked into the Roadway Inn on Highway 6. The announcement hung in the air, momentous and yet somehow anticlimactic after everything else that had happened. Why now? I asked, my voice more challenging than I intended. She met my eyes directly, something she rarely did when speaking about Richard. Because I saw his post about David, about you. It was so full of lies, so deliberately cruel. She swallowed hard, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep silent while he tried to destroy the last good thing in your life. She turned to David, her expression raw with emotion. I'm sorry. For everything. For believing him over you. For letting him push you away. For not being strong enough to stand up for our son. David's response surprised me with its gentleness. We were both young, Elaine. You were scared. Richard is persuasive, manipulative. But you fought, she said, her voice breaking. For years you fought. For Liam, while I just surrendered. You protected him in your own way, David said, though we all knew the words were more generous than accurate. Not well enough, my mother replied, wiping at her eyes. But I want to start now, if you'll let me. She turned back to me, reaching into her purse to pull out a small velvet pouch. Richard's missing watch, she said, handing it to me. It was his father's. He keeps it in the safe, or did, until I took it before leaving today. I stared at the pouch in my hand, understanding slowly dawning. You're going to tell the police he falsified the report. She nodded. And the school board, and anyone else who needs to hear it. A new steadiness had entered her voice. I have other evidence too. Financial documents showing how he's manipulated. business deals, recordings of his threats. You've been planning this, I realized, since your birthday. Seeing you walk away in the rain, knowing I'd failed you completely. She took a shuddering breath. Something broke in me, and something else finally woke up. For the first time in my memory, I saw my mother clearly, not as the passive, fearful woman who had permitted Richard's cruelty, but as someone who had been trapped in the same web that had entangled me, only deeper, with more devastating consequences. What will you do now? I asked. Get a divorce. Find a job. I was a nurse before Richard insisted I stop working. Start over. She glanced between David and me. I don't expect to be part of your lives. Not right away. Maybe not ever. That's your choice, and I'll respect it. But I needed you to know that I finally made the right choice, even if it's 18 years too late. The honesty in her words, the lack of emotional manipulation, the absence of excuses, felt like the first authentic conversation we'd ever had. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible yet, but something else was. Understanding. It's not too late, I said finally. Not completely. The hope that flashed across her face was almost painful to witness. Thank you, she whispered. As she rose to leave, David spoke up. Where will you go after the motel? Do you have somewhere safe? My mother looked surprised at his concern. My sister in Portland said I can stay with her until I find my own place. David nodded. If you need anything, legal help, security, anything, please ask. Richard won't. Take this lying down. I know, she said grimly, but I'm not afraid anymore. That's his greatest weapon, and it doesn't work now. After she left, David and I sat in stunned silence, processing the unexpected turn of events. Finally, I let out a long breath. I didn't see that coming. Me neither, David admitted, but I'm glad. For her sake as much as yours. Do you think she'll be okay? Asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to me. David considered this. I think she's stronger than Richard let her believe, than she let herself believe. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful, like someone else I know. The comparison startled me, but as I reflected on it, I recognized the truth. My mother and I had both been diminished under Richard's roof, both taught to make ourselves smaller, less visible, less troublesome, and we had both finally found the courage to walk away. What happens next? I asked, suddenly aware that my carefully planned future, college choices made to appease Richard, career paths selected for his approval, had dissolved, leaving infinite, terrifying possibilities in its place. David's answer was simple, but profound. Whatever you want, Liam. Whatever you choose. Choice. The concept still felt novel, exhilarating, and slightly overwhelming. But as I looked at David, my father, my true father, I realized I didn't have to make those choices alone anymore. For the first time in my life, I had people in my corner who wanted me to succeed, not for their own validation, but simply because they loved me. And that made all the difference. In the world, the final days of the school year passed in a blur of exams, yearbook signings, and whispered conversations. Richard's public accusations and my mother's subsequent departure had become Maplewood's most discussed topic, with new revelations emerging daily about his business practices, his threats against local competitors, his manipulation of town council decisions. I kept my head down, focused on finishing strong, supported by Tyler and other friends who formed a protective circle around me. David remained in town, a constant, steady presence without being intrusive, joining me for dinner some evenings, offering help with exam preparation, but always respecting my space and independence. By graduation day, Richard had retreated entirely from public view. Rumors circulated that several business partners were pulling out of deals, that the bank was reviewing his loans, that criminal charges might be forthcoming for financial improprieties my mother had documented. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling under the weight of long-suppressed truths. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt strangely hollow, as though the years spent under his control couldn't be undone by his downfall, as though my value couldn't be affirmed by his disgrace. It's normal, David told me the night before graduation as we sat on the Reynolds' back porch. Wishing someone else's pain will heal yours is a trap. Then what does heal it? I asked. He considered this, looking out at the fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. Time, honesty, building, something new that's yours, not defined by what happened before. He glanced at me, his eyes reflecting the fading light. At least that's what helped me after Afghanistan, after losing you. The comparison gave me pause. David had survived real trauma, war, loss, betrayal, yet had emerged without the bitterness that consumed Richard, without the need to control others that drove him. How did you, not become like him? I asked suddenly. Angry. Vengeful. David smiled slightly. Oh, I was angry, for years. Furious at your mother, at Richard, at the courts, at myself. His expression grew serious. But anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It hollows you out, leaves nothing for the things that matter. Like what? Like being ready if you ever needed me. Like building a life I wouldn't be ashamed for you to see someday. He shrugged. Turned out wood was more forgiving than my thoughts. So I carved and built and sanded until my hands were too tired to make fists anymore. The simple wisdom in his words settled into me, not as an immediate cure, but as a path worth considering. Not revenge, not bitterness, but creation. Building rather than destroying. Graduation morning dawned bright and clear, the Oregon rain giving way to unexpected sunshine. I dressed in the new clothes David had insisted on buying. A gift, not charity, he'd emphasized when I'd protested. The dark blue suit fit perfectly, making me look older, more confident than I felt. In the school gymnasium, decorated with blue and silver streamers and balloons, I took my place among my classmates. From my seat, I could see David in the audience sitting beside the Reynolds family, his expression a mixture of pride and wistfulness. Happiness for this moment, sadness for all the moments before it he'd missed. And then, 3 rows behind him, my mother. She hadn't told me she was coming, hadn't presumed upon our fragile reconnection to expect an invitation. But she was there, wearing a simple dress I'd never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way Richard had always discouraged. When our eyes met, she offered a small, hesitant wave, not demanding acknowledgement but simply offering support. I nodded in return, a gesture small enough to be deniable but significant enough to be understood. We had miles to go in rebuilding trust, but the journey had begun. Principal Matthews stepped to the podium, his voice echoing through the packed gymnasium. Before we begin presenting diplomas, I'd like to announce this year's winner of the Maplewood Community Scholarship. This award goes to a student who has demonstrated exceptional character, resilience, and academic promise. I half listened, mentally rehearsing how not to trip while crossing the stage for my diploma. This year's recipient has overcome significant personal challenges while maintaining a 3.8 GPA and contributing to our school community through the literary magazine, environmental club, and peer tutoring program. A murmur ran through the crowd as classmates began looking in my direction. Surely he couldn't mean... The scholarship committee was particularly moved by this student's personal essay about finding his voice and his truth after years of silence. It is my great honor to present the Maplewood Community Scholarship to Liam Anderson. Stunned, I made my way to the podium amid applause that seemed distant through the rushing in my ears. I'd applied for the scholarship months ago, never expecting to win, especially after the recent drama surrounding my family. Principal Matthews handed me the certificate, adding in a low voice, "The committee voted unanimously, Liam, before any of the recent events. This is on your merit alone." The distinction mattered more than he could know. That I had been recognized not as a victim of Richard's cruelty or a participant in town gossip, but for who I was, what I had accomplished despite the obstacles. As I returned to my seat, certificate clutched in trembling hands, I caught David's eye. The naked pride in his expression nearly undid my composure. He hadn't known about the application, hadn't pulled strings or influenced the decision. This moment belonged purely to me, my first independent achievement in a life that had always been overshadowed by Richard's control. After the ceremony, amidst the chaos of photographs and congratulations, David made his way to my side, waiting patiently until I finished hugging friends and shaking teachers' hands. "Congratulations," he said simply, then surprised me with an embrace that felt both foreign and deeply familiar, as though my body remembered what my mind could not, being held by this man when I was too young to form memories. "Thank you," I said, pulling back with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "For being here." "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied. Then, more soberly, "I missed too much already." A throat cleared behind us, and we turned to find my mother standing a respectful distance away. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said uncertainly. "Not at all," David answered before I could, his generosity once again surprising me. "Liam should have both his parents here today." The simple statement, acknowledging her place in my life without rancor or resentment, seemed to both relieve and overwhelm her. "Thank you," she said softly. Then to me, I'm so proud of you, Liam. The scholarship, the diploma, but mostly, your courage to walk away that night, to choose truth over comfort. Her words were the closest we had come to directly. Addressing Richard's birthday ultimatum, my rain-soaked departure, the subsequent unraveling of our family's careful facade. How are you doing? I asked, genuinely wanting to know. Are you safe? She nodded. I'm staying with Aunt Meredith in Portland. I've applied for nursing positions at 3 hospitals there. A flicker of something like pride crossed her face. I had an interview yesterday. Actually, it went well. That's great, Mom. The title slipped out naturally, without the hesitation or resentment I might have expected to feel. An awkward silence descended, broken when David cleared his throat. I was thinking of taking Liam to dinner to celebrate. Would you like to join us? The invitation, so gracious, so unnecessary, clearly caught my mother by surprise. I wouldn't want to intrude on your time together. You wouldn't be, I said, realizing as I spoke that I meant it. I'd like you to come, if you want. The restaurant David had chosen was upscale but unpretentious, a family-owned Italian place on the edge of town. As we were shown to our table, I noticed several of Richard's business associates dining nearby. They looked away quickly when they saw us, discomfort evident in their expressions. I heard Richard's leaving town, my mother said quietly once we were seated, selling the house, transferring his main business interest to the Portland branch. Good, I said firmly. Maplewood will be better without him. David studied me over his menu. You know his leaving doesn't erase what happened, right? Doesn't magically fix everything? I nodded, appreciating his honesty, his refusal to offer easy platitudes. I know, but it helps to think about moving forward without his shadow hanging over everything. Where will you go? My mother asked, the question directed at both of us. Back to my place for the summer, David answered. After that, it's up to Liam. With the scholarship and financial aid, he has options for college. The casual confirmation that I would be living with David, that we had discussed and decided this without drama or negotiation, seemed to both pain and relieve my mother. I'm glad, she said finally. You deserve a real father, Liam. You always did. And a mother, David added, surprising us both. Elaine made mistakes, we all did, but she loves you. My mother's eyes filled with tears at the unexpected defense. I didn't protect him, she whispered. Not enough. Not when it mattered. But you did in the end, I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. You left. You exposed Richard's lies. That counts for something. The meal that followed was unlike any family dinner I had ever experienced. Honest, sometimes awkward, but free from the undercurrent of tension that had characterized every interaction in Richard's presence. We talked about real things. My college possibilities, my mother's nursing career, David's woodworking business. No topics were off limits. No emotions needed to be hidden for fear of reprisal. As we finished dessert, David excused himself briefly, leaving my mother and me alone. He's a good man, she said quietly. He always was. That was part of the problem, actually. What do you mean? She considered her words carefully. Richard made me feel safe because he was so certain about everything. After you were born, I was overwhelmed, afraid I'd fail you. David was struggling too, with his PTSD, with adjusting to civilian life. Richard offered security, control. It seemed like what I needed then. But it wasn't, I said. No, it was what I feared I couldn't provide for myself. She met my eyes directly. I want you to understand something, Liam. I'm not making excuses. What I did, allowing Richard to push David out of your life, staying when I should have left, that's on me. But I want you to be careful not to make the same mistake. What mistake? Trading your voice, your truth, for security, or approval, or anything. Really. Her expression was more open, more authentic than I could ever remember seeing. It's a terrible bargain, one I hope you never make. As David returned to the table, I considered her words, recognizing the wisdom hard-won through her own mistakes. The temptation she described wasn't foreign to me. I'd spent years editing myself, diminishing my needs and feelings to maintain Richard's approval, to keep peace in our household. But now, looking between these two imperfect people who both, in their different ways, loved me, I felt something unfamiliar taking root. The confidence that I was worthy of being heard, of being chosen, of being fought for. 2 weeks after graduation, I stood in David's workshop, watching as he carved precise grooves into a piece of cherry wood. The cabin had quickly become home in ways Richard's larger, more impressive house never had. filled with books and conversation, with the scent of coffee and sawdust, with the simple freedom to exist without walking on eggshells. "What are you making?" I asked, gesturing to the wood taking shape beneath his hands. "A sign," he said, continuing his careful work. "For the driveway." I moved closer, reading the partially carved letters. Foster and Son Woodworks. "Son?" I repeated, a lump forming in my throat. David looked up, his expression uncertain. "If that's okay, we don't have to use it if it feels too soon or too much." "It's not too soon," I said quickly. "It's perfect." He smiled, relief evident in his face. "I thought maybe you could learn the business this summer, if you're interested." No pressure either way. Another choice freely offered. Another door opened without demands attached. I'd like that. As I watched him return to his carving, I thought about all that had transpired in the month since my rain-soaked birthday. The revelations, the confrontations, my mother's courage, Richard's downfall. The story wasn't finished, of course. There would be more challenges ahead. Adjusting to life with David, navigating a new relationship with my mother, starting college in the fall. But for the first time, I wasn't facing those challenges alone or from a position of weakness. I had people in my corner now. Not just David and, in her way, my mother, but also the Reynolds family, my friends from Maplewood, teachers who had seen my potential even when I couldn't. The rain that had soaked me on that birthday night, that had seemed like the final indignity in a life of quiet desperation, had actually been a baptism of sorts, a washing away of the old life, the false narratives, the carefully maintained illusions. What remained was simpler but stronger. Truth. Family, not by obligation but by choice. Love, not as a manipulation, but as a foundation. Outside, a summer storm was gathering, dark clouds building on the horizon. But here in this workshop, with the man who had never stopped fighting for me, I felt no fear of the coming rain. I had weathered worse storms already, and I had learned that sometimes walking into the rain is the first step toward finding your way home.